Well, good morning. Good to see everybody out this morning. It's nice to see the sun in the sky, and I know we're going to have a 62-degree day to look forward to, but it is great to be here. Great to be with you and in this class as we are talking about the subject of troubled over many things. You know, somebody said, is this going to be a negative class? I know it's not a negative class. Do y'all think it's been a negative class at all? Have we been negative? Huh? Okay, well, thanks for that positive confirmation this morning. No, it's about trying to get our lives the way they need to be based on what God wants us to do. And when we don't do that, kind of some of the problems that are associated with that as well, and the choices that we make and how they impact not only our relationship with God, but our relationship with, people that we deal with every day. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. If you are a visitor, we are certainly glad to have you with us this morning and hope you'll come back anytime you have the opportunity. I did get some more books, so if you'd like to have a book to look at while you're here today, we've got some in the back, and the guys will be glad to get one to you, I'm sure. If you came to the class late and you don't have a book yet, then take one. But I think we've gotten, I don't know what the numbers are in the class, but I think we've had about 120 or 30 books. And so anyway, I'm glad for folks to have the material. It's great stuff. But have a book. We're on lesson 4. We're going to start, though, and let John Whitaker do a prayer for us, and then we'll get into this.
Let's all bow. Our wonderful and gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for this morning. We thank you for a good night's rest last night, and we thank you so much for our church family. We thank you for the abilities that we have to gather together and to do your will. We ask that everything we do this morning is according to your word, and we specifically ask that this morning in class that we are good listeners and that we pay attention to what is presented to us and that we use it to further strengthen our families to do your will. We ask that you be with Jim and all the other teachers this morning, that you help them remember what they have studied and prepared, and that what they say and present to us is applicable to our lives. Be with us this morning as we worship you and the rest of this week, that we strive to have a zeal to serve you in our everyday life. Forgive us of all our sins. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, John. Okay, so the class today is Trouble Over Many Things, part 2 on family discord. So we already talked about part 1 there and several things. We'll get into that in just a minute. But I just want to start with a question. What's your takeaway so far in class? On all the things we've talked about just the introduction and worry and family discord and the things that I went over last Wednesday night or last Sunday morning, and that Garry hit also again on Wednesday. So tell me so far what you have taken away from class. Come on. What are you practically applying to your life as a result of the things that we've studied so far? And if you think about it, we're a month in. We just got 2 months left to finish the quarter. So what have you gotten out of what we've talked about, and what are you trying to do as a result of it? Because, that's the whole deal, is application of what you learn. And if we're not applying what we're learning, then how are we having any kind of impact over here, Garry? How are you applying what you are learning about what we're talking about?
Really trying not to keep up with the Joneses, evaluating what we have and what we need and what we really don't need anymore.
Okay, fantastic. That's really good. I mean, the fact that we don't set our standard by somebody else's. Okay, Mike's got one behind you here. And who else had one over here too?
Worry hinders our spiritual growth. When we are bogged down with the worries of this life, we don't make time to grow spiritually and put our heads in our Bibles and hit our knees and pray.
Man, that's a fantastic one, and I'm glad, Mike, you said that, because I think worry can cause us to really live in a false state of reality. Does that make sense? You can worry so much that reality is something other than where you are, and you've created a problem for yourself. Somebody else? Anybody else? I thought you had one. Anybody else over here? Ron? Wait a minute. Let John get you the microphone. It's important to take his stuff and apply it.
I think that
Just hold it up there close.
I think that worry impedes me from counting my blessings. You get so worried about different things or just preoccupied, you just don't really realize all the beautiful things that God has given you, and just it keeps you from compartmentalizing things where they should be. If there's something troubling you, just put it off to the side and be in the present and be grateful to God for what he gives you, and then that way you can be more concerned rather than just fretting and moping about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, and people say they get distracted and they got all this junk going on and they let it totally derail them and you don't remember what's important. I mean, and there are a lot of things to be thankful for, and we do lose sight of that. So, anybody else? Anything else? Those are all good. So here's what we talked about in last Sunday and then Wednesday. We talked about family discord in class number 3. We talked about selfishness and being self-centered. We talked about poor communication, what a problem that is. And John talked about even in his prayer being good listeners. And then it's the execution of what we've learned. And then the third thing is money and the love of it. And again, that was one of the things we talked about in class. If we're just working for what we can have over what we need. And again, that was one of the big things we always talked about with the kids. We'll always make sure you've got what you need. You might not always have everything that you want, but you'll never not have anything that you need. Is there anything wrong with having some of what you want? There's not anything wrong with that at all. Not at all. But you can't let it be what you worship to the point that you don't keep things straight the way that you should. So here's what we're going to start talking about this morning and also talk about on Wednesday night. Sex. Oh, wow, that's something people don't generally like to talk about in the church building. We're going to talk about sex? Yes, we are. Number 2, religious differences, not being on God's page. Religious differences and the impact it has on family discord. The in-laws. I am one. Some of the rest of you are one too. Can that be a problem? Can we be problems as in-laws? Yeah, we can. And we're going to talk about that. And then lifestyle choices, time, and how we use it. And it's funny because this comes up in it seems like every class that I teach, it comes up. We're talking about lifestyle choices. We're talking about things that are important to us. We're talking about comparing what we have and what we want to what somebody else has and what they want. And then we've got to decide what matters and how we're investing time in the things that really matter. So again, this is another part of what I've talked about. And why is it important to know what your priorities are? As we're talking about family discord, as we're talking about problems with sex and religious differences and in-laws and lifestyle choices, why is it important to know what your priorities are? Back over here, Ryan. Why is it important to know what your priorities are?
I heard a saying a long time ago that says, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time.
Absolutely true. And that kind of goes back to that picture I had earlier in the presentation of classes where, there's a target out there and you use the right equipment to make sure that you empower yourself to do the best you can to hit the target. You got to have the right resources. If you don't have any priorities, if you don't have a target, you're going to hit it every time. And it's going to be just kind of bumping through the walls of life every day and kind of letting whatever happens determine how you're going to feel. You let everything around you determine how you're going to feel instead of you having any impact on how you're going to feel. Do y'all ever do that? Come on, say yes. Shake your head or something for me. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I heard a little rattling there as people were shaking their heads. You know, you've got to decide, because things are going to happen. You've got to decide what your focus, what your priorities are going to be, what you are going to have as your commitment. And also, not letting difficult times overcome us and turning to God and His Word and prayer to make sure that we maintain the continuity that we need in our lives. Otherwise, every day it's a new free-for-all. I get up and my hair's on fire this morning, and it's about this and this and this and this, and ooh, I got all this going on, and wow, you just don't understand. This is the way my life is. You can't understand what I'm going through. And we do that too. You know, one of the other things that we talked about was this proactive or reactive life as it relates to sexual issues or religious differences or in-laws or lifestyle choices. Why are proactive and reactive lives important? What does it talk about in James, the first chapter, verses 19 through 27? It says basically, take God's Word and think about how you're going to apply it in your life every day. Colossians 3:12 through 16 and 4 and 1 through 6. It talks about the kind of character that we're supposed to have. So as it relates to all these things that could potentially be issues or bring discord in our families, we've got to work on being who God would have us to be. Living a Bible-based life, an intentional life, every day to the very best of our ability. Jason's got one over here.
Last quarter I taught a class in the junior high class about decision making.
Okay.
And how important it was, and we talked about different types of decisions, and when you make those decisions, one of the points I made was the easiest decisions for you to make are the ones you choose to let somebody else make for you.
That's a good point.
And when it comes to the proactive life, the left side of this slide here, if you are reading the Bible and you have a close relationship to God, and you've already made up your mind that I'm going to do what He says, that's one less decision that you have to make. It's already done. It's made. Your mind's made up for you.
Yeah.
And so if you stay ahead of the game, as we're kind of talking about here, then a lot of these issues become lessened.
Great point. Thank you. And here's one of the things that I've just started doing not too long ago as a result of the things I've studied in class for this class. It has been such a great help to me. I'm going to share it with you right now, and you can give it a try and see what you think. When I wake up in the morning, before I even get out of bed, I stop and I take time to say a prayer, and then I focus on the things that I'm going to try and do and the person that I'm going to try and be and what's important to me and how I'm going to deal with everything that happens in my life that day before I ever get out of bed. Because if I don't do that, you know what's probably going to happen? I'm going to get sidetracked of my own vices. I'm going to pick my phone up. I'm going to say, well, let's see what's going on in the news. And I'm going to say, well, let's look at this and let's look at that. And I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And before I know it, I've derailed myself. I've self-destructed myself. And I don't need to do that. I need to make sure that I'm trying to be the kind of person that Christ was. Because that's who we're supposed to be, right? That's what we said. Galatians 2:20, Ephesians 2:10 says that it's not me living anymore, it's Him living through me. And it also says that I'm His workmanship. And I know you've heard me say this a few times already, all of that. But why am I doing that? There's a couple of reasons. Why do you think I'm doing that? Anybody have a guess? Now, this silence does not make me uncomfortable, just so you know. Brad's going to chime in. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that.
Well, I would hope it would be, because of what Matthew 24 and 44 says. It
Okay.
says, for this reason you be ready too, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will.
Yeah, absolutely. We do not know when the Lord's going to come.
When we wake up in the morning, you know, when we ask ourselves the question, did you think the Lord would come today? And my answer is no.
Right.
Think about that verse. That's when he's going to come.
Yeah. Matthew 24:44, and he talks about it over in 1 Peter 2. It's important that we're ready for that day when it does come. And it's important that we try and do what he said for us to do. Because if we don't put him first, if we don't put what he's told us to do first, then there's no way we're going to be ready when that day does come. And until that day comes, we've got responsibilities. We've got responsibilities for him. And, you know, we've talked about those things too, and I'm not going to go through all those. But we've got our picture of our family here that we've shown from the beginning. Is there discord in your family? We let Satan and sin make discord in our family happen. And what Connie Adams says at the end of this class in lesson 4 is whatever you do, don't let Satan wreck your home. And as we're talking about those issues today of sex, religious differences, in-laws, and lifestyle choices, do you think Satan wrecks any homes over those issues? Do you think he does? I guarantee you he does. And he's looking for every way that he possibly can to make it happen. Because when we don't get in that book right there, when families don't get in that book, that's when discord happens. When fathers don't provide leadership to their families, that's when discord happens. Mike said that the other night or day. When fathers don't provide the kind of leadership that's needed, that's when we see problems. Well, even when they do see problems, sometimes there's problems with jealousy and envy and just all kinds of problems, in addition to what we're talking about. What about Joseph and his brothers in Genesis 37? What was going on there? What one word kind of describes that whole situation of how the brothers felt toward Joseph?
Jealousy.
Jealousy, envy, hatred. I mean, they were ready to kill him. And Reuben steps in and says, wait just a minute, let's don't kill him. We'll just throw him in this pit. And let's think a little bit more about what we want to do. So we'll just sell him. And you know, I thought about, if they just sold him, did they not have any thought that maybe they'd get back to Dad? And he was the favorite. And so then it perpetuated what? A big lie that they brought back to their dad. So what kind of family discord did all of those problems create for them? But Joseph was what? Through all of that, what was Joseph? He was a man of God. He chose the high road. He chose to do what he should do. And you know, we got to ask ourselves the same questions. What about the prodigal son in Luke 15? What kind of things do you see there? You know, one of the things it says was, he goes to his father and he says, give me half of what is mine. So he's like saying, you're not dead yet, but whatever you got, half of it's mine, so go on, give it to me, because I'm done. I'm out. Right? And so then he goes out and does what? He just basically throws it all away because of what he wanted. And then he comes back, and what kind of problems begin as a result of him coming back? Comes back, his dad accepts him, but what's the problem? What happens again? Same thing we said a minute ago. Jealousy, envy. And it's his older brother. And what does he say? He says, hey, I've been here the whole time, and you never killed a calf and had a party for me. Jealousy, envy, discord in families. And then what about the children of Israel in Exodus 14? At every corner, God frees them, and what do they say? What's the first thing they say after they leave? Did you just bring us out here to die? It would have been better if we'd have just been there. No appreciation for the freedom that they've enjoyed. No appreciation for, God being with them and freeing them. Parting the Red Sea, taking care of them. It's just complain, complain, complain. And what about us? Do we just want to complain, or do we want to see things for the way that they are? When we don't study our Bibles together as families, we create an environment for family discord. And if we don't do things God's way and we try and do them our way, like Brad said, we're not going to be ready for that day when it does come. Because generally it's like we talked about. Do we think today's going to be the day the Lord's going to come? No, we generally probably don't. But you know what? He tells us he's going to come at his own time. We have got to believe that. And then we've got to do the very best we can to live every day that it reflects that he could come at any time. Yes, sir.
You know, for those of us in here who work in either the medical world
yes.
or banking, for instance,
yes,
we know that examiners don't announce when they're coming always. We put policies and procedures in place in case today's the day. How different is it for us at home?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we won't know. And again, I've told you and told you and told you what my personal goals are, and I just suggest that you've got some put in place if you don't have them. All right, family discord in those areas we've talked about, checkpoint. The family discord that we're talking about today, like I said, are these areas, and we will not cover them all today. We'll get to the rest of them on Wednesday night. I'm really thinking maybe the first two, if we can get to the second one. So, family discord and trouble over sex. If there's discord in the family and it's related to sex, it causes us to lose sight of our priorities. It causes us to lose sight of our roles. It causes us to lose sight of our relationships, lose sight of our responsibilities, and then also, gives you something else to worry about. Until you get to the place where you're so deep in your sin that you can't even see it for what it really is. How does that happen? How does somebody get into sin so deep that they can't see the sin for what it really is? That goes back to what we taught in the last class. We're self-centered. We're self-centered. And the kinds of problems that people have are brought on in lots of different ways. Look at what's on TV. Look at what's on the computer. Look at what's on our mobile phones. Look at what people wear. Oops, I want to go backwards. Yeah, and look at what people wear. So are we bombarded by sexuality today in the world that we live in? We absolutely are. But you know what? I decide what I am going to look at on my phone. I decide what I am going to look at on my computer. I decide what I am going to look at on my television. I decide whether or not I'm going to look at a person of the opposite sex based on what they are wearing. When a man is looking at a woman, and maybe she's got on something that is not appropriate because she she wants to fit in today's fashions. That man, it'd be great if that woman didn't wear that outfit that might be a problem. But ultimately, that man has to make a choice about whether or not he's going to look that way or look a different way. Computers, TV shows, smartphones. I mean, what used to have a rating system with regard to watching on TV, it is the wild, wild west now. And it doesn't matter. I mean, network television, they're showing everything under the sun. Absolutely everything under the sun. It used to be, some of you will remember this, some will not, on Dick Van Dyke Show, and he'd come in, trip over the ottoman, and when they would show the bedroom scene, he would be in one single bed, and his wife Laura would be in the other single bed. They wouldn't even show them in the same bed together. Today, there are no restrictions. And if you go to one of the outlets apart from the networks, like Netflix or Amazon's original material, it just seems like they go for the worst. It seems like, and that must be what they think everybody wants. So the language, the sexuality, the skin, the acts that people participate in, it doesn't matter. Because they think that's what the world thinks is okay or what the world wants. So that's what they give them. Pornography. Think pornography is a problem in the world we live in today? Let me tell you something. If you don't think it is, you are living under a rock. And I don't say that to be unkind. I'm just saying it because I was under a rock not too terribly long ago with regard to that issue. It is terrible. And it's because it's so accessible. But here's where it all started. Right here, the smartphone. It's kind of ironic that we call that a smartphone. And it makes us so stupid in so many ways. Or maybe I should say make stupid choices. But when we lose sight of what our priorities are with regard to sexuality, then here's what happens. Sexual sin, lust, self-pleasure, adultery, fornication. It all impacts relationships with God, our spouses, our future spouses, and our families. Jason was talking about decisions and teaching the young people about decisions. I'm telling you, if parents today are not having conversations about their sexuality and what God expects of them at age 10 and 11, they're missing the boat. Because that's when kids are getting exposed to all the issues that are out there. And what we got to do is we got to go back to what I was talking about earlier, and I've talked about for the entire month of January, and that is living intentional lives. And that is living a life that is directed by what God says we should be, instead of letting the world define what we're going to be. And like I said, pornography is a real problem. Do you know what the word scourge means? Go ahead.
I mean, we know that Jesus was scourged.
Right.
And we know the description and the pain and what that all, entailed when he was scourged before, walking with the cross.
So it's a whip, especially one designed to inflict pain or punishment, an instrument of punishment or criticism, a cause of wide or great affliction. Pornography is a scourge on families. Brad's got a comment over here. Gary?
Jim, one thing about scourge, too, is the wounds that it inflicts are deep.
Oh, yeah.
And
Whew.
cosmetic surgery won't do away with them.
You are right.
They're
Is that microphone on? I don't think it is.
Those welts were there.
Yeah.
Those wounds will never, they're not something you can't unsee.
That's a good parallel too. Yeah. And the same is true with relationships with regard to pornography and immorality sexually, adultery, fornication. When I said to my wife almost 37 years ago, I made a vow to her. I made a commitment to her. I made a promise to her that I was not going to violate that agreement that I made with her. And it was an agreement that God instituted. And so I'm bound by God, and I'm bound by the contract that I've made with her. So that contract, that agreement with her says, you can count on me. And you know what? And let me just ask you, I mean, and it's different things for different people, but I'll just tell you for me personally. The most important part of my relationship over that period of time with my wife has been trust. Trust. That she's going to do what's right to help me get to heaven, and I'm going to do what's right to get her to heaven. That she's going to be able to count on me. That if something gets my attention that shouldn't, I'm going to look away. I'm not going to linger. That I'm not going to let my mind be scourged by pornography. And again, I cannot drive home enough to parents and grandparents what a huge issue this is. It is. I remember having a conversation in the last year, and when I became aware of just how bad it was, I just started going to guys that I knew. And, you know, I'm kind of bashful. I have a hard time. Jason's making a face. I'm a little bit bashful. I'm kidding. I'm not bashful at all. But I don't mind just asking somebody. So I'd roll up to a guy that I'd know, and I'd say, look, I'm doing some research. And I want you to answer a question for me. And you don't have to if you don't want to. But have you ever looked at pornography? Yes or no? And they'd either answer yes or no. If they answered yes, I said, I'm not going to judge you on this. I said, if they said they had, I said, why? I mean, that's my obvious question. And I can remember one person in particular that the world would see as a successful person and a person that is a Christian. And this person said, oh, I was bored. I was bored. So I'm bored and I'm going to look at pornography. I can think of so many other things that I can look at if I'm bored other than pornography. Well, my mind just wanders. Well, this morning when I was walking the dog before I came to church, the big game is to always see how much wildlife I can see. I saw a squirrel and a red-headed woodpecker. So my mind wandering, Rachel, is I see the red-headed woodpecker and I think, I bet they're loners. Wonder how many babies they have. How long are they together with the, I mean, that's interesting to me, how God designed a bird to go up and, you know, so before it's over with, I'll be on the internet researching the red-headed woodpecker. I love information. I like knowing things that are going to just give me a little bit better understanding of God's creation or how things work. But pornography is not one of those things that is going to make me a better person in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I'm telling you, women have the problem just like men have the problem. So don't think it's just the guys that have that issue. It is a scourge in the lives of families today and members of the church. Because if you think it's not in the church, again, you're living under a rock. And I'm talking about the church all over the place. Because I talk with other folks at other congregations, and yeah, it's real. So, you know, the thing that we've got to decide is if it is something that has been a problem, we've got to not let it be a problem. And that's true of all the things that are sexual sins that cause us to lust, that cause us to violate our relationship with our spouse, that cause us to not be in the relationship with the spouse as we should. Hebrews 13:4, God established marriage, and He's not against sex, but He established marriage for the intent of a husband and wife being able to express their love for one another. That it's an honorable relationship. And that's the way kids need to be taught about sex. Not the way they see it out there in the world that we live in today. Because how do they see it out there in the world that we live in today? It's just a casual pastime. It's being accepted. It's being part of the group. It's on TV all the time. And I'll tell you, one of the worst networks with regard to immorality is the CW. I mean, it's like every show they've got, it's either homosexuality or sexuality or killing somebody or whatever. And it's like, it's unbelievable what the world is getting fed, and we've got to decide if we're going to eat that too. We've got to decide if that's going to be our diet or if something else is going to be our diet. When we think about sex, 1 Corinthians 7:2-5, says that we're to have sex with married partners. And my wife have that relationship because that's what God ordained that relationship to be. But it's not to be any way other than that. Now, Paul did not marry by choice. He said basically, I'm not going to marry, but if immorality is going to be a problem for you, then you need to marry. So we've got to decide what we're going to do, what's going to be important to us, how we're going to live our lives, how we're going to let the world see us. I think the other thing too is it's amazing how we can be involved in sin and people think that nobody notices. You know what I mean? I mean, we think we've got this secret sin and nobody knows. Or I show up to church every once in a while and everything's okay, whatever it might be. Whatever the sin might be, period. But right now we're talking about sexual immorality. Is our sin always going to find us out? Right up here, Garry. Mike's got one. Is our sin always going to find us out one way or the other? It is going to find us out. Mike? That microphone must be dead. I don't think it's working. John, come on down here if you don't mind. It's non-functioning.
Wanted to make a point back up here to 1 Corinthians 7:2-5.
Okay.
I preached my daughter's wedding back in November, and when I sat down to counsel her and our now son-in-law, and I also talked about this during the ceremony. When you got married, Jim, you made a decision at that point and a vow before God to your wife that you were going to be faithful. But you also made a vow, and she made a vow, that you were going to be there for each other.
Yeah.
And in 1 Corinthians 7:2-5, that means sex.
Yeah, read it.
That's exactly what it means.
Just read it for us if you don't mind.
But because of immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. These verses are here for a reason. And we have obligations as husbands. We have an obligation to know our wives and to love our wives. They
Right.
have desires, even sexual desires, but so does the man.
Right.
And sex is not to be used as a tool or as a weapon in the home. And I think that when we look at this book we're studying, we're talking about troubled over family discord. This is here for a reason, because unfortunately sometimes it's used that way.
Yeah.
And that causes discord. It causes issues and problems in the family. It causes there to not be happiness in the home on both sides. And that's important. This is an important piece to study and wrap your brain around, because it is what helps to keep harmony in the home, and we have an obligation to abide by it as we read right here in these verses.
Well, it's a culmination of every other aspect of our relationship too, isn't it? I mean, it's the appreciation that we have for one another. But it is, like you said, it is an obligation, but we should never feel obliged, I don't think. I think it should be an act of love, of personal expression, of appreciation that we have for one another and what each partner is bringing to that relationship. So thank you for pointing that out. But you're right, it does get used. But at the same time, when there is an issue, maybe the man or the woman needs to be asking themselves, am I doing what I should be in this relationship? Am I being the husband I should be? Am I being the wife that I should be to my husband? Not only from a sexual standpoint, but also from other aspects of living our lives together as one. Two become one. And we're going to get into that when we get into the in-laws piece, because a lot of times that's where there's a problem too, is where the two become one plus the in-laws. Right? So you know, I'm very sensitive to that, and we're going to talk about that more later on. But you know, Jenny and I don't want to have negative impact on Nathan and Rachel's relationship, but we want to be able to be there and support them, help them, encourage them. But we don't want to run their lives or be hovering over all the time. That's not the way it's supposed to be. We want to be around them. We're glad we're here, and we're glad they're here. We're glad we get to be with our grandson. All that is wonderful. But they got to make their own decisions. They got to live their own life. But we have got to live our own lives too, as husbands and wives. And if we're not a husband and wife, if we are alone, if we're single, either by choice or because we've lost our mate, still, you know, we've got to predetermine that our lives are going to be one that God's going to be happy with, in the choices that we make, in the way that we live, and the things that we do, and in the things that we don't do. And again, that all comes from proactive living. Avoid fornications. Understanding that if we allow it to be, it can be a sin against ourselves, our partner, and God. We are admonished to flee fornication. Husband and wives to render what is due to one another, as it talks about in 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 5. And then, you know, making sure that our lives are what they need to be every day. So that's probably about as far as we're going to get, and then we will pick up on a little bit of a wrap-up there on Wednesday night. I showed you this before too, and it's all those building blocks that are important for how we're going to be prepared every day for whatever comes our way. You know, I want to be so focused on the things that I proactively need to do in my life that these are not a problem for me. If I get those priorities right, I'm going to appreciate my wife for what she does for me, for the little things. And I'm going to work at my relationship being what God would have my relationship with her to be in every way possible. Okay, so we'll pick up there on Wednesday night. And visitors, we're glad to have you. Hope you enjoyed the class and come back anytime.